Welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 193, which is a really great group chat I just had with Thacker, who's a VP of monetization at Poshmark. Prior to Poshmark, Adi was at TikTok, and before that, led monetization at Facebook Marketplace. So he has some real incredible marketplace experience. So this is a great chat with Adi, where he started off by sharing some of his key learnings from Facebook Marketplace and TikTok, what led him to joining Poshmark and leading monetization. We discussed some of the common monetization strategies for marketplaces. Audie shares some of the biggest mistakes that he sees founders make with monetization, a few trends with consumer marketplaces and AI. We also had a great group Q&A. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm going to find it a great watch to the end. So, Audie, as I mentioned to you right before we started recording, it's been a while since your past group chat and a workshop that you led with us on monetization. So I'm excited to have you join us again here today. I want to start off with saying a huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. We have a lot that we're going to dive into with all of your incredible marketplace experience. But before we do, I thought it might be great if you can start off by briefly sharing your background for those here that have just joined us.
I'm Thacker, based in the SF Bay area. Good morning, good afternoon, folks. I'm not sure where you guys are. So I've been in marketplaces and ads for nearly a decade now. I think this space chose me, and then I kind of embraced it. And I've sort of been in this space ever since. I really enjoy the space because of the complexity of matching. It's almost like you're building a economy of sorts. My marketplace journey started with the startup in the education space that I started. That didn't go very well. Transitioned to Facebook, worked on ads, worked on marketplaces. Transitioned to TikTok, where I built a managed marketplace, and then now at Poshmark for the last 3 years and some as VP of monetization and partnerships. So that's my journey. I've seen a lot of do's and don'ts in the space. So happy to share my learnings from all these adventures.
That's a really incredible background again, and thanks for sharing with us on that. So a lot that we're going to get into here, but going back to Facebook Marketplace and TikTok, what were some of your key learnings from there that you've taken with you to Poshmark?
So for context, right, Facebook and TikTok are a billion DAU MAU consumer companies, right? And Poshmark is sort of, I'd say, mid and small capish, and startups are startups, right? So like different orders and magnitude of just users and complexity and sophistication, not just of the product, but also of the talent and the tools that you have to build, ship, iterate, and manage. So I think when you go from a large company to a small company, there's a lot of lessons you can take in terms of talent, product rigor, craft, and just like basic principles around building good products and building good marketplaces. So I think the ones that I can rattle out from the top of my head, I've made some notes over here, is sort of product craft, right? I think when you hire PMs, I've seen a lot of PMs in the non sort of FANG companies tend to be sort of feature factory, sort of feature pushers. But the product craft at Meta especially was so sophisticated, where the focus really was on the consumer or the user, and there was a very clear mapping of building features that drive metrics that solve problem for the users, right? So picking the right metrics that map to the mission of the product, whether it's buyer or seller or writer or driver, was super, super critical. And then it was very intentional to make sure that every feature that was shipped or launched moved the metric and input metric, like Amazon calls it, that eventually moved the output metric to the marketplace, not just orders or GMV. So I think that rigor, I've not seen it, at least in my journey, I've not seen it pervasive. So I think that's number one. I think two is having a high bar for talent. I think, being mid-cap or startup, you can't hire sort of the best of the breed, but I think that's something that you can start with a B team and eventually advance to an A team as the product and the company grows. I think the one lesson that is marketplace specific that can be carried over, irrespective of size, is finding product market fit on both sides of the marketplace. And that's super critical, right? So I think that's something that Facebook obsessively sort of measured and managed and said, hey, did we find PMF? Are we still in PMF? Have we fallen out of PMF, right? So I think PMF is a state, it's not terminal. So just sort of being able to understand that your product market fit, not only for the entire supply and demand side, but even the different layers and segments, if you have different categories, right? It's super important. I think the one thing we did not worry about at at big code that small codes have to really be concerned about is sort of the channel economics, right? I think, at Facebook, I was oblivious to user acquisition economics and just sort of LTV to CAC because everyone is on Facebook every day. And, when you have a billion people, especially on marketplace daily, there's tons of room and traffic to experiment, not the luxury of a small cap company or a startup. So finding channel market fit, and we really spend a lot of time on making sure our channel allocation, our media mix allocation is optimal at Poshmark so that we have the right contribution margin and to drive the right EBITDA. I think, as you're a startup or a small code, that becomes super critical too, right? What's the right channel? Define my audience, what's a sustainable payback period, and all those things become critical. So product market fit, channel market fit, right? I mean, Facebook, they're only concerned with product market fit. And then finally, I think, for folks that have marketplaces that are doing email and push, I think it's really easy to get caught in the loop of sending a lot of email to drive traffic or push to drive traffic. It's a slippery slope, man. That's what I can say, right? I think if you don't, you can only increase volume. Well, you can have reach, but you got to be careful with frequency, right? And you want to increase frequency only when you increase relevance, right? So just make sure you hold a high bar. I mean, there are times when perhaps you need more traffic and you can get a bit greedy and do it. It's okay. But on a sustainable basis, you want to make sure that, you're principled. Right? I think that's the other sort of overall lesson that we learned at Facebook is stay principled while building your products. I think they always said that, look, first find product market fit and then find the spark and then pour gasoline on the spark, right, to actually grow. And monetization and ads will always step 99, right? Like, the first 99 steps are for you guys to build liquidity, build matching, get the flywheel going, and then monetize, right? Because I think it's always a trade-off between long-term and short-term revenue, right? When you focus on liquidity, focus on sessions, focus on matching, focus on traffic, you're solving for long-term revenue. You start, over monetizing, right? Increasing the take rate. Yes, you may improve your revenue numbers in the short term, but you're paying the price in terms of liquidity down the road. So I think that's what I learned. I think Facebook was more sophisticated than TikTok. A lot of folks went from Meta to TikTok and Pinterest and sort of Reddit and took those lessons with them and the Snap as well. And then raise their product craft over there. Then folks will go to places like, like a Poshmark, sort of mid small cap, mid cap, and then startups, right? So mostly the kind of waterfall of learnings you can take as you sort of go from company size in terms of craft and rigor and key principles from marketplaces and products.
Those are all really great learning. It's going to be super helpful. Lots of topics too that we're always discussing here as early stage founders. But I'm glad you helped kind of emphasize the point of, at the early stages, focusing on getting to liquidity initially. So, so transitioning over to Poshmark, what led you to joining Poshmark? What are some of the biggest challenges with it as a resale marketplace?
Yeah, so I think my goal was always to work to be an exec or a leader in a smaller company, and I think that is still my goal. So I sort of done the big code thing, and for me, I felt like I'd reached. I'm curious and I'm keen to learn, and I felt like at 4.5 years, I sort of maybe maxed out learnings over there. And I was looking at smaller companies, and Poshmark, was a very successful, and still is a, fashion resale marketplace. It's the largest by a mile in North America. And, they'd grown really well. They had a good bunch of years during COVID. They went IPO. And then they're almost like over a decade since they were founded. And then the question becomes, look, we have good liquidity in the marketplace, but now how do we build other monetization streams to diversify revenue? And I think, there's a bunch of things you can do, right? You can introduce tools for sellers, tools for buyers. You can use monetization responsibly. You can do subscription products. That's when they kind of brought me in. I think the company was ready to take on the next step, and I was looking, so I think timing worked out. And I've been there over 3 years now, so build out the ads business. We're increasing take rate. We are a material driver of revenue now, and yeah, so I think that was the genesis of this journey.
That's great. So, and I did want to kind of spend some time discussing the specific monetization strategies. And I know you mentioned one to kind of start with as far as like take rates. So when it comes to like earlier stage marketplaces, how do you advise founders to think about, initially setting a take rate? And what do you think some of the key considerations are as well?
A take rate or commission is sort of the marketplace fee for matching buyers and sellers, right? And for a processing payment and for managing fraud, right? So that is sort of your fee for the service and the value that you provide. I think when you're typically starting a marketplace as a founder, it's not in a vacuum. So you're going to look around and see, like, most marketplaces will have a take rate of a certain amount on the supply side for sellers. Some will have it on the buyer side. I think most commerce marketplaces have it on the supply side. There are a couple of exceptions, like Vinted in Europe, that has it on the buyer side. But I would say look around and see what see what your competitors are doing. I think the take rate magnitude has to be high enough to sustain your business, but it has to be low enough where there's an incentive for the supply side to move over to your platform to keep most of their earnings from making a sale or selling a service, right? So I think that's sort of the nuance right over there. Is there's no perfect number. I mean, lower is better always because then you just encourage more supply to latch onto your platform, and there's incentive to move over in kind of multi-tenant. If you have sellers on multiple platforms, I'd say it's just a function of your space, right? Let's look eBay for an example, right? eBay has got different take rates based on category because different product categories have different margins, right? I mean, in apparel recently in Europe, they actually dropped their commission to zero. That's what Vinted did. So Vinted in the UK and Europe has zero on the seller side. They have a buyer side take rate, and then eBay followed suit in the UK and for apparel globally as well. So that's what they've done, right? So I think they've looked around, they've seen what is working or so how the trends are shifting in terms of consumer behavior on resale. And I'd say those are the key principles, right? I think high enough to sustain your business, low enough to incentivize listing behavior. Make sure it is maybe consistent or so with the competition because you have consumer behavior at scale that's been attuned to certain models. So unless you have a novel insight and believe you can do the contrary, then I think that's a different approach. But and actually Vinted did that, right? I think they came into Europe saying, look, I mean, we're going to go against the norm. We're going to shift the fee to the buyer side, and it worked well.
That's going to be some great examples as well. So another thing that we're often discussing here is as far as like changing take rates or kind of marketplace fees, right? So do you have any tips maybe for founders to kind of think about this? And we can use an example maybe at like the earlier stages. So maybe they've kind of like used lower take rates to initially kind of like attract supply, but then thinking about like, when they should potentially change it and how to do so.
Look, I mean, Etsy has done that, right? I mean, Etsy has one of the lowest take rates in resale. I think they're currently at around 6.5%, but they actually started off, I think, around 4%, when they IPO'd, right? So the take rate was very attractive, extremely low. They have since built other monetization streams to increase the overall take rate between the commission and other streams so that the blended take rate is pretty high. But being a new marketplace in that space, they're able to attract a lot of supply. With that strategy, over time, I think they've changed their take rate 2 times since they started, right? So they went from 4 to 5 something and 6.5. Each time they did that, there was uproar and pandemonium in the community. And I think the key really has to be is, being at CU, look around and say, like, what's the best alternative platform for the sellers still here? And there are not very many, right? I mean, if you think about fashion resale, Poshmark is the biggest, and a lot of sellers complain in the community, but eventually, I think this is, they're a professional seller or a small medium business. This is their livelihood, right? So there's always going to be pandemonium and complaints, and they'll be distraught with the changes. But I think the lessons we learned is that you have to persist, right? I think what happened with Etsy's setting responded. I mean, there was chaos, but eventually, I think it did not affect the business too much. But I think what they saw is that the revenue growth exceeded their GMV growth because they were taking more from the marketplace. I've not looked whether GMV growth has decelerated because they maybe increased the take rate, but it's hard to attribute that directly, the change directly. So they started low in the eBay apparel example. I think eBay is at roughly around 13.5% or so as a take rate. I think they dropped that to 0. So that's the opposite example. And I think they did that as a reaction to competition. I think Mercari did something similar actually, and then they actually went back because it did not work for their economics. That was very painful. Um, but yeah, I've seen Whatnot do short-term holdouts as promotions where they actually say, hey, like, we're not going to charge a seller fee for, for a few weeks. So I think that's the other lever, right? So I think in general, I think you want to start low to encourage liquidity. I think you want to build supply, typically in most marketplaces, and then you attract demand, and then that's what kind of kicks off the flywheel.
Definitely, those are lots of great examples. Also, too, you mentioned the whatnot example, previously on your workshop, as far as like suggesting for founders to make it time bound as well.
It's also a great test, right? I mean, to see if dropping your marketplace increases supply liquidity, and you could actually test that, right? You could drop it, by a few points, and then drop it to zero, and see the elasticity of that in terms of supply, and see what that means for attracting demand as well.
No, definitely. And then you also mentioned, previously as far as like, value added services. So sometimes, marketplaces, it could be, somewhat table stakes to, add these value added services. So going beyond just simply kind of, connecting buyers and sellers or matching. So, when it comes to like monetization strategies and this, how do you, I guess, like advise founders to think about that and how to account for that in a monetization strategy?
Yeah, there's kind of typical streams, right? So beyond your take rate, which should be your primary stream, there's advertising, and there's two types over there. One is sort of a marketing tool where sellers can promote or boost their listings or products. Something that's most common. If you look at eBay, Etsy, Poshmark, DoorDash, they all have this. They call it promoted or boosted. So they can, and it's a seller agency tool, right? I think sellers that are willing to pay more to sell more or sell faster to increase sell through will pay the extra premium, which adds to the overall take rate. But I think that's a very difficult tool. I mean, if you look at, I saw the Q1 numbers a couple of days ago, and eBay adds around 2% to their take rate through ads, right? Around 14 to 15% of the revenue is their advertising, which is very material. I think Etsy is even higher because their base take rate or commission is so low. Poshmark, we've been on this journey for 3 years now, and it's working out pretty well. So I think that's a one core stream, right? The other streams that we've seen are subscriptions, right? If you look at like, Uber One and Dash Pass, and those typically are on the demand side of the marketplace where you see just like having advertising or promoted listings for the power sellers, you also have tools for the power shoppers or buyers or writers, right? They actually want a premium car, or they want free shipping, for example. But that's also another revenue stream that is pretty common. And then eBay has got something called subscription for shops. So, some of their bigger businesses want to have insights, they want more tooling, they want lower listing fees. So I think that's the other stream. So there's a diversity of things. I think, I've looked at this in the past, and, companies like Sitter City, for example, that match caregivers with care seekers have a background check service and other stuff like that, right? So these are the peripheral things, but I think the key over here is sort of timing and making sure that the secondary streams are accretive to take rate and accretive to GMV, right? It's very easy to go far down the path of introducing too much advertising too soon, because the nature of advertising, even if it's done very responsibly, is not all sellers are going to advertise. So, and when you show these ads in any experience, it could be search or recommendations, you're pulling from a smaller pool of items to represent it, right? And it's taking up real estate, right? So the relevance is always going to be lower, right? But you're getting some relevance. I mean, the cost of lower relevance is immediate revenue. It's a click or an impression or what have you, right? So I think it's important to be cautious to introduce, especially advertising, especially endemic advertising, which is like, promoted listings at the right stage, right? I was looking at some of my older slides, and eBay introduced ads around 20 years after they launched, right? Significant, right? Etsy was also, Poshmark has been over a decade, and then you can start introducing ads. There are exceptions, like I think I was looking at Instacart. Instacart launched ads before IPO, right? Because that's a three-sided marketplace. Groceries are very low margin, ads are high margins. Ads are a very inherent part of their business. So yeah, so I'd say I think the cardinal rule here is focus on liquidity and grow a marketplace as much as you can. I think GMV is sort of the North Star. I think there are sort of many levers downstream And as to increase take rate, both via commission and through ancillary streams of revenue. But marketplaces that get to that point, a secondary stream of revenue is usually a privilege of the successful. It's not something you want to consider early in the journey.
Yeah, that's such a great point. So I know I mentioned to you right before you started recording, when it comes to ads, like a lot of times it's, typically kind of like too early when founders are thinking about that. And, sometimes kind of degrades the marketplace experience and is at the cost of the marketplace.
Yep. Yeah, I think the other example is, I mean, you could argue that, well, if I'm a classifieds marketplace, that's my only source of revenue. At Facebook, again, Facebook has the privilege of being sizable and being funded by, by Meta, but Facebook Marketplace, we were very responsible with ads. We only introduced ads, once the marketplace had product market fit on both sides of the market, right? So, in general, you don't want to introduce any elements in the shopping or selling experience that may impede your path to product market fit and get the flywheel going to scale.
Yeah, that's going to be really helpful. And I guess like if you had to share like a few kind of tips for founders on, like I would say like, when and then how to, roll out like ads, what would a few of those tips kind of be?
There's two types of ads, right? I think the first type is just sort of endemic, which is like, you're boosting listings. So it's organic. It feels organic where, in commerce, you click on an ad and you go and buy something within the marketplace, right? And then there's non-endemic ads, which is inserting third-party advertising into the consumer experience where a click takes the user offsite, right? I think the latter is more dangerous than the former. You want to be careful with both. I think the cost of introducing third-party ads is low because it was plugging an ad network. The cost of introducing first-party ads is high because you need some sophistication in-house to build. Well, not only build it, but also like do it responsibly. I'd say push it out as much as you can is my advice over here, right? Because as I mentioned before, I think this ancillary revenue stream is something you want to consider when you're at scale, that you have a high growth marketplace and you want to boost the take rate. I mean, I always call them take rate boosters and not GMV boosters, right? I think, at this stage, you want to be focused on liquidity and GMV. As a founder.
Those are great tips. So I want to, spend some time discussing AI. I know we could, get kind of bogged down into monetization. It's a really exciting time in the world of marketplaces right now with AI. So, how are you seeing AI impact on marketplaces, and how do you think this will kind of, I would say, like change the future of marketplaces, kind of moving forward?
The main changes that we are seeing at our end are on the listing journey. I think listing can be a bit tedious, especially if it's not coming through a feed. I mean, if it's manual consumer-based listing. So there's a lot of tooling to list better, more efficiently, where you can just take a picture of the product and the different attributes auto-populate. I mean, it's not perfect, but it definitely sort of brings down. It reduces the tension of creating a listing, and the more listings you have, the more accurate they are. But sort of better the description is, it's better for your search and your matching engines to actually pick up attributes to show them to the right shopper, the right user at the right time. So that's one area. I think the other part that I'm seeing a lot in the marketplaces is a lot of PDPs or listing detail pages now have review summaries, right? So that's pretty common, right? So now it's a very easy and very simple use of AI, where instead of reading through every review, you get something Amazon has it and a few other marketplaces have it. I think the other part is sort of this using transformer models in matching is key now. So a lot of ML-based matching has just been based on ML, right? I think like there's recommendation, the search, but now with your transformer models, it actually introduces new dimensions and attributes to create more liquidity in matching demand and supply. So I think these are the main things that we're seeing. I think we're also seeing on the fashion side, on the shopper side, we're seeing the use of AI as a shopping and sort of a styling assistant in the apparel space. So, say like, if you say you like a certain things, you could, the AI shopping agent is going to recommend different styles that they think might sort of match your taste. So that's what we're seeing mostly. So mostly, I think what we've done at Poshmark is we have a smart AI listing tool that has worked out pretty well. It definitely eases, sort of reduces the friction of listing. It's more accurate. It's speedier. And then on the ad side, we are introducing transformer-based models to predict clicks and conversions.
And another topic that I wanted to chat about kind of briefly right before we get to the group Q&A is some trends that you're seeing as far as like with social commerce and consumer marketplaces. So I guess like are there any specific trends that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think we've been paying close attention to just styling and sort of agents, right? I think that's a one space. So we're actually watching a couple of AI-based startups that help with styling. So I think as a modality of interacting with apps changes from being very search driven or to kind of being interactive and sort of chat driven, you know, it's very likely the hypothesis is that I think that's going to become maybe the predominant or significant share of behavior as we interact with apps in general. So, I mean, I spend as much time now on ChatGPT as I do on search, right? So, and if you carry that into different sort of marketplace experiences as a buyer or seller, your modality of selling or buying something will be very different than it is today. You're not going to be searching or browsing. I think you may be a bit more direct. So I think that's something that we are watching. There's a bunch of startups in the fashion space that are doing this, both in terms of selling easier and even in terms of being shopping assistant. So I think that's a trend we're seeing. What else? I think from a macro perspective, I think the tariffs are definitely helping resale in the fashion space. So we don't know how persistent that advantage is going to be. But I'd say those are the two main trends. I think on a macro basis, I think it's not been the easiest time for commerce marketplaces. There's very few that the big ones, Walmart, Amazon, have been doing really well. If you look at eBay and Etsy, they're not doing as well. I mean, relatively. So I think overall, we're sort of watching consumer spend on commerce and resale. So I'd say, yeah, so AI and sort of the macro economy have been key areas. I think broadly, I think the other thing that's really interesting is I think since IDFA has happened, right? I think it's changed the user acquisition economics significantly for D2C companies and performance marketing teams. And that's a very dynamic space, right? I think, Apple and the different, I think the French regulator now actually has said, hey, like, maybe, you should pass an IDFA to offer better targeting. So I think how that space evolves will change the acquisition economics and even the channel market fit, which we talked about earlier, for many startups. It might make the acquisition economics more favorable. We'll have to watch that space.
Yeah, definitely an interesting time right now. And you bring a unique perspective as well, so it's going to be great. We'll probably get to a few of the questions during the group Q&A that are related to it. So right before we do though, because I definitely want to make sure we can save some time for founders to come on here. Do you have a few tips maybe for early stage marketplace founders that you could share with us?
I just say focus on product market fit. I mean, liquidity, right? I think that's the key. There's three ways to increase orders, right? I think you increase demand, you increase supply, and you improve matching. I think it's just like physics, right? I mean, those three things do not change, right? And I think depending on where you are constrained, you're going to have different sensitivity of these different levers to improve or increase GMV orders, right? If you are demand constrained, you bump up demand, you're going to see an uptick. If you're supply constrained, same thing's going to happen, right? And matching is always a constant lever, right? You can always optimize algorithms like constantly to hit those signals and continually up. And I think that's the other learning from Meta as well. I think at some point you become demand constrained, either because of the acquisition economics or you become supply constrained because you have all the key sellers on the marketplace, right? But the gift that keeps on giving is optimizing and matching the algorithm. There's a lot of signals you can pick up, from about shoppers and about buyers on the demand side, and you can continually improve the way you show the right item to the right user in the right moment, so that they can click and convert and make buy something or book something. Right. So I think that's something that we learned that even though the impact of this endeavor is small, but it's almost like you can hit these signals like, quarter over quarter, and it's the impact of it compounds over time.
It's going to be a helpful tips. So cool. So we're going to get to the group Q&A. Hey, Molly, do you want to come on?
I'm Molly Morse. I'm the founder of Recess, which is a marketplace for in-person kids classes and camps. I really am curious about matching and advertising. So how you relax, if you relax, some of the matching the matching algorithm to surface paid ads. I've seen places that relax that too much, and you see an ad that's completely unrelated to your search. It's a very aggravating consumer experience. But then I imagine if those restrictions are too tight, you can't make enough revenue on those ads. So just curious if you have found the sweet spot, what that looks like.
So good question. And there is no sweet spot. I think the question becomes sort of the give and the get, right? So I think there's actually a way to measure this and arrive at the sweet spot that's palatable to you. And I think we usually do we create a holdout. It's actually called a no ads holdout. So maybe like 10-20% of your consumers you don't want to show them any ads. And then what you'll see over time is that you'll see the difference in GMV between the segments that see ads and don't see ads, right? So, and then you'll see the net revenue as well. So eventually the segment that sees ads, you want to have incremental revenue. So I think your goal with ads is incremental revenue. So if the segment that sees ads, the ads are so disruptive that the revenue gained offsets the revenue you get from your take rate or your primary stream of monetization, then it's a bad idea. So then maybe you want to curtail ads a bit more until you get to a point where advertising is relevant enough for it to be incremental to your overall business. So there's no exact point. I think the exact point is something that you arrive at, and it's really unique to a marketplace based on the moment you are in terms of liquidity and in terms of, buyers and sellers, or I guess parents and camps in your case, right? So I think kind of understanding the framework to arrive at that point is more important than knowing what the point is. And I think that is sort of the framework, right? I mean, it's going to summarize: partition your audience, measure diligently, see if ads are incremental. Are they incremental at all? Incremental enough? And then you make the call to relax constraints or not.
That's a great question. That's going to be super helpful. Hey, Adi, I actually had a related question because it's come up a few times in the community, and it's for marketplaces that are a little bit earlier stages, so they might not have experimentation. How do you suggest maybe testing when it comes to ads?
This is a problem, right? I think everyone talks about moving fast, breaking stuff, A/B testing, speed of testing, but it's a privilege of the rich, right? I think you have to be a certain scale to actually do it, right? And the speed of testing at Poshmark is significantly lower than the speed of testing at Facebook for a reason, right? As because your audience is limited. So I think there's a couple of ways to do this, right? I think you don't need to have a perfect statistical setup at this stage. You can't even do it, right? And if you do it, it'll take you months, maybe a year to run that, right? So I think it's okay to do a before and after, an on-off test, like go cold, it won't be perfect, but I think because your scale is so small, and the treatment of the insertion of the treatment is so different from the baseline, you'll see a large enough effect where before and after, and we don't before and after in statistical testing because of the impacts of seasonality, right? But seasonality effects are small, right? So I think at your stage, you've been doing, hey, I'm going to run ads. I'm going to run this new feature for a week. I'm going to take it away for a week. If the change is large enough, you will see a difference right away, and that should give you confidence to go out and do it. That's one. The other one is sort of more principle, framework, kind of leap of faith. Well, that company in our space has it, so we should do it because they're big enough and they've done a bunch of testing at their end. They're more advanced, so we should do it, right? So I think if you can triangulate your way to being experiment oriented without being really statistically rigorous, given the scale.
It's going to be really helpful. So yeah, you also mentioned that seasonality, right? So I feel like there's so many different kind of variables that come into play. So
yeah, but I think when for example, if you insert ads and you insert a lot of ads, right, the change is going to be significant enough where any seasonality change, whether it's weekly, is going to be sort of minuscule compared to the impact you're going to see with the introduction ads or some major feature, right?
Awesome. Hey, Connor or Joe, I want to come on. I know you sent me a question in advance.
Howdy, thanks for jumping on. My name is Connor Lydon. I'm the founder of Trust App. We do end-to-end transactions for marketplaces. So we run kind of payments, shipping, dispute management for all sorts of different types of marketplaces. And I had a question kind of going back to your time at Facebook, and just curious, why you think Facebook never pursued kind of a strategy to go transactional, or to let their users transact with each other. That's kind of the main question.
Facebook Marketplace is majority classifieds, right? It's local. It's and they do have ship products, right? I mean, if you go through the listings, they do have items that, but that's the minority of listings. They did, well, they had Facebook shops and Instagram shops for a while. So I think they did have a intentional strategy, which in TikTok has one right now, for TikTok shops, right? So they tried it. I was there when they tried it. I think I left, and I think I don't think they were a success, because if you look at Facebook Marketplace, right, majority of the commerce that happens is discovery driven. It's not intentful search driven. So it's people that are coming in, they're just like looking around. Hey, this is a good deal. I'll go buy it. Right now, it's the same behavior on Facebook and Instagram. So when you create a commerce marketplace over there, and you bring in all these brands, you get a lot of discovery, but not enough conversion. So I think my observation when I was there, when they tried doing this, they brought in a bunch of brands across different categories, fashion, et cetera. Just the conversion yield was just, for that scale was just not optimal. So which is why I think I don't think they found product market fit with any category that they had tested from a commerce perspective. Yeah, and I think just knowing Facebook, because if they don't find product market fit with something, they choose to terminate initiatives pretty quickly. So I think because the intent of the audience when they open a Facebook app or an Instagram app is on commerce. They want to be inspired, they want to be entertained, and that's it. TikTok shop's a bit of a different story. I think TikTok audience is younger, Gen Z, and they tend to start a lot of searches on TikTok. So they're coming in with intent, and then they also have a creator-based approach in terms of shopping and their shops. So I think it's a different audience with a different intent, and I think it seems to work better with TikTok, and they have the scale to attract the right kind of creators and brands to create shops.
That's a great question. It's come up a few times in the community now, kind of discussing. So that'll be helpful. Hey, I actually had a question from a founder that sent me in advance, and it was around reduced fees for power sellers. And is that something that you've seen work well as far as reducing fees to attract power sellers? And then somewhat related to this was do you, as far as like when power sellers might bring demand, and as far as like reducing fees for that. So do you have any maybe tips or I would say like advice on that?
Yeah, I've seen that happen where larger sellers get lower fees because they are pursuing operating margin is sort of their optimization, right? So they're very margin sensitive. Yeah, so I think that is a tactic, especially if it is a large seller that has a key bunch of listings or supply that is strategic to the marketplace. Or I think, as you mentioned, I think, if in the case of live streaming, like, if you have a key influencer that brings in an audience, which is great, right? Because then you're saying, well, you're going to save me user acquisition costs. It's going to bring me all these shoppers or users on the demand side of the platform. So I'm actually okay, like giving you a lower, sort of taking a lower take rate from you, to in this experience. So the answer is yes. I can't put a finger on when and where and who has done this, but I think it just makes sense, right? I think the challenge over here is, I think if you start doing it across the tiers, then it becomes a bit sensitive in how you communicate this to the community at large of sellers. So I think if you have key strategic deals with large influencers, then it probably makes sense. And I think it's been done before.
Definitely not. I'm sure too, if you have you have those on like a per seller kind of basis, then it becomes hard to manage those as well. Cool. Hey, Maxine, do you want to come on?
Thank you for such nuanced, deep answers that make my brain like consistently go deeper. I'm Maxine. I'm the founder of a company called Pick My Brain, where we sell marketplaces to communities that want to facilitate more conversation and connection. But my question is related to percent of your decisions that are based on data versus intuition at the different companies you've worked on. When do you jump outside of the models? When do you stay within the models? How much range do you get depending on the size of the marketplace? Comment on that.
When you're starting a company, it's based on intuition. It's based on the whim, right? I think, most product decisions are just based on instinct. They're based on intuition. I've seen this work well, see the consumer pattern. I saw this work in that industry. I think that can work well over here. So I think, as you go from having no data to less data to having no traffic to some traffic to a lot of traffic, you can gradually shift your sort of the construct of what informs your decision from intuition to data. It can never be data only or experiments. I think you have to do even some your instinct, the qualitative research, talk to users, triangulate patterns from other marketplaces or the consumer apps, and then arrive at the decision. But I think you're able to build conviction the bigger you are, right? Because you have multiple sort of sources of information. But even when you start off, I think, you can use your instinct, you can talk to shoppers and talk to users and sort of at least build a fair degree of conviction. I think, when you're building a product, the key always is, I'm going to invest all this time, all these resources to build something. How do I have confidence that I'm going to have ROI on this feature or the service that I'm building? And I think the more conviction you can build, the better off you'll be, obviously. I mean, I think sort of almost like risk minimization in terms of getting to the outcomes that you want, right? So I think that's sort of how I think about it. When we build a couple of 0 to 1 experiences, I think, you said, look, here are the key problems we're trying to solve for. We know these are problems because they're true. We've talked to these users. They currently solve the problems using methods A, B, and C. They'd be better off with our solution because the problem is a fact. The solution is creative. All right. So you want to make sure that the solution that you arrive at is solves the problem better than the current alternatives, right? And that's why you need to keep iterating and moving fast. And yes, you can A/B test, but you can quickly shift the solution to solve the problem better.
Well, cool. So we're almost out of time here, but I appreciate taking the time to join us for the follow-up group chat. This is fun to kind of dive into things again and hear some kind of updates and also to the latest with AI here. So I know it's an exciting time, and also appreciate taking the time to answer some of the questions that we all had for you. So I actually had one last question before we wrap things up, and I know I kind of asked it before, so I'll kind of like slightly reframe it here, which is if you could go back to kind of, I would say, like that kind of pre-AI right before the kind of AI era for our marketplaces, what would you tell yourself about them?
I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but for me, massive change is coming. I mean, if you just ask yourselves, right? I mean, the way you consume information has been transformed. I mean, I plan my trips and seek advice and learn stuff primarily now on AI. So I think what's interesting is I think what's changed is not just the chat agent experience, but I think we're starting to trust the responses a lot more and have that guide our decisions in life, right? To me, that is sort of, I think it's not just a modality of interaction. I think it's the impact of an interaction that I think is significant that we don't talk about enough. You can search for stuff and you get a lot of options, but then you do a lot of digging. But I feel like the depth of trust and the impact of that research or the information is not as profound as it is when you're using AI. So I think to me, that's the key transformation. So the impact of the experience is far more severe, positive or negative, hopefully mostly positive, in how we make life choices, right? You're in your car, you're shopping, going on a trip, seeking advice on some issues, personal or otherwise. You have an agent right there, like $20 a month, and it does a pretty darn good job.
Well, that's going to be a great, parting thoughts for us all here. And, once again, really appreciate taking the time to join us here today for the awesome follow-up group chat. And I'll also be sure to include links to the past workshop resources and also your socials so everyone can follow along. So thanks again for joining us for the awesome group chat, Adi. And thanks everyone for the questions.